Hey everyone, it's been a while since I've been here. I want to do another reading for the first time video. As you all know, I was the target demographic in the era of dystopian young adult novels. Everyone and their mom was writing a dystopian teen novel and releasing it, and none of them is quite so famous as the Divergent trilogy. I remember one of my friends being so into Divergent when we were in middle school, and even taking a quiz to see like which Divergent faction are you in, and I think I took it too. I don't remember what I got, which is, I mean, the extent of my knowledge of these books. But it's finally happening. I am going to be reading the Divergent trilogy for the first time. We're gonna start tomorrow, and the traditional reading for the first time road trip vlog. Hopefully they're not as bad as everyone is saying they are, so otherwise I was just here to suffer for your entertainment. Divergent starts exactly as you would expect for this kind of book, with Beatrice putting herself down, being very self-deprecating, while also describing herself in a way that is very clearly conventionally attractive. We're also introduced to the society that she lives in and the way that everything is broken down into factions, which are just pushed to the absolute extreme. Like, the Dauntless are brave, so they run downstairs and jump on trains, which is, you know, the bravest thing you can think of is running downstairs. But also, it doesn't really make sense. Like, Triss is being reprimanded for being curious and asking questions, but that to me seems like a selfless trait because you're curious about someone else and you want to know what they have to say. When Triss goes through her simulation to choose which faction she will live in, that is when it is revealed that she is Divergent. Roll credits. Ugh, I wish we could roll credits. Ugh, I wish there was not so much more to read. Like, it's so stereotypical. Like, every single character trait is just taken to the absolute extreme. I just found another example of what I was talking about. So they're touring the Dauntless compound, and she describes it as saying, uneven rock walls rise several stories above my head. Built into the stone walls are places for food, clothing, supplies, leisure activities. Narrow paths and steps carved from rock connect them. There are no barriers to keep people from falling over the side. So, okay, I understand that, like, the Dauntless are supposed to be, like, brave, but it's to the point where they're stupid. Like, violating, like, OSHA is not brave. And considering that these are supposed to be people who are supposed to be, like, I guess the military and the police, like, because they're supposed to deal with the threats. There are rules and regulations. Sometimes they don't always follow them, but, you know, they're there. It's sort of this idea of what a dystopian world would look like and, like, a post-apocalyptic world would look like, but not really diving into why it looks like that. It's almost like parody, like, it's so over the top. The chasm reminds us that there is a fine line between bravery and idiocy. Well, I'm glad we're at least acknowledging it, but unfortunately I think we've well crossed that line at this point. This is probably a good time to say that this book is not at all what I thought it was going to be. Basically, the entire book is just following Triss's initiation and the way that the friendships that she's making are helping her get through it, and the enemies that she's making because some people want to kill to get to the top of the leaderboards. One thing this book is successful at is making me really hate the character of Eric. He is just sort of awful. But to be fair, I also hate For. Like, this line here where he says, "If I wanted to hurt you, don't you think I would have already?" Like, this guy is supposed to be their love interest. That is the most toxic thing I've ever heard in my life. There are so few interesting things that have happened. I'm 200 pages into this about 500 page book, and the only thing that has happened is that she has discovered she's Divergent, and she's done some training for Dauntless. And that is it. There's a couple things that I think are supposed to be interesting. The attack on Edward, that I think was supposed to be interesting. Didn't really care. Finding out her mom used to be from Dauntless is pretty interesting. I think that was the most exciting thing that has happened. Let me use this analogy, okay? So, you know when you go to a restaurant and you look at the menu and you see something that looks really, really good and they have a picture of this meal that looks delicious. And you're like, okay, I'm gonna get that. And then they bring it out and they give you like a plate of cold peas and a burnt chicken wing. This is not what I wanted. Like, the original idea of this meal was so good, but the execution sucks. Yeah? Divergent is nothing like that. Divergent is like looking at the menu and seeing the cold peas and the burnt chicken wing, and you think to yourself, well, I'm not going to be having a good meal, but at least I'll be getting a meal. It'll be a good story to tell about this bad meal that I had. And then they bring out a plate that is empty. That is what this is. I thought this book was going to be like so bad that it would be funny. It's just boring. That is like the biggest sin of this book, honestly, is that like it's so uninteresting. As Triss climbs up the rankings to become the top initiate into Dauntless, I am really seeing a parallel to Katniss being the highest of all of the players in the Hunger Games, but also Triss just has zero sense of self-preservation. She's been told by everyone who knows that she is Divergent to lay low and not draw attention to herself, and what does she do? She draws attention to herself. Like, come on, girl. This is one of those books that is like a YA novel where people fall in love or like are deeply attracted to someone basically instantly. And we're seeing that with Tristan 4. How old is he supposed to be? Because he's the training guy and he was previously an initiate. And I don't think they've actually said how many years ago that was. I think he said that the training got changed 10 years prior. And then Eric was sort of their protege. Is he 26 years old? Because that's a problem. One second, I need to look something up. Okay, he's 18. When do they say that? But I should have suspected that, because that's generally a thing. You've got the YA protagonist who is 16, and then you've got the love interest who is 18. Sorry, I just am distracted by the fact that on this question people also search for Jennifer Coolidge? Is Jennifer Coolidge in Divergent? Okay, finally something interesting happened. Triss was attacked, which I think we all saw coming considering what happened to the last guy who was in first place in the rankings. But one of the attackers was Al, which is surprising. I didn't see that coming, and I didn't really see any clues. Like, he was so nice to her, and even though he was sort of in last place, so he might have been feeling kind of desperate, I understand that. But taking her out wouldn't really help him at all because he's in last place. Like, if he was like just one out, that would maybe make more sense. But if he was gonna get in, he'd have to kill like all of them. Which I guess, you know, maybe that was his plan, but it just doesn't seem in character for him. You know, I haven't read past that, so maybe they'll reveal like more of like he had been planning this the whole time or something, or he was just pretending to be friends with him. We'll see.
10 seconds later.
Okay, never mind. The reason for why he attacked her is because she was stronger than him and he didn't like that. Veronica Roth, you truly understand the human psyche. Oh my gosh, it's so stupid. Oh my gosh, this is so stupid. I laugh shakily. You're a little scary for. Do me a favor, he says, and don't call me that. What should I call you then? Nothing. He takes his hand from my face. Yet. That's so dumb. You can't just tell someone not to call you the only name that they know and then not give them an alternative. Nothing yet. What is the obsession with YA romances and the sense of smell? Like, why are we so obsessed with what these fictional men smell like? I am fully convinced that Veronica Roth does not know what Al's motivations are, because he has now thrown himself into the chasm, and this is a guy who was so willing to try and get into Dauntless that he was going to kill his friend, and now he's just willing to give up. I don't get what his motivations are supposed to be. Ew. You think my first instinct is to protect you because you're small or a girl or a stiff, but you're wrong. He leans his face close to mine and wraps his fingers around my chin. My skin tingles at the point of contact like he's transmitting electricity through his skin. My first instinct is to push you until you break, just to see how hard I have to press. Tris, honestly, run, girl. Just run. This is the least healthy thing I've ever heard anyone say about someone that they are attracted to. Oh my gosh. This is what we're encouraging girls to desire in a relationship? Come on now. Tris is a character who is so stupid, but simultaneously is meant to be the hero, and we see that very clearly when she enters Four's fear landscape, because suddenly she's able to solve all of his problems instantly, even though she can barely keep her divergence a secret in the real world. Oh my gosh. So Four tells her that he's been watching her because he likes her. And she says, I'm not trying to be self-deprecating. I say, I just don't get it. I'm younger, I'm not pretty. We are so deep into the not like other girls phase. The biggest sins that this book is committing is that most of it is deeply boring. And any interaction between these two makes me want to throw myself into the chasm. Tris just finished her final initiation. I do have like one confusion about it, because Tris was talking about how this the fear landscape is always based on like mental preparedness for these fears, and all of her fears are like, oh, I'm not actually scared of crows attacking me. I'm scared of not being in control. I'm not scared of drowning. I'm scared of not being able to escape. But all of Four's were like very literal. He's scared of closed-in spaces. He's scared of his abusive father. The other woman, whose name I've already forgotten, who they had to go into her fear landscape, hers are very literal, like public humiliation, being kidnapped. So which is it? Is it literal fears, or is it like these figurative ones? Is it both? Does Tris not have any literal fears? Well, I've been begging for something to happen, and it finally is, in the form of all of Tris's friends being brainwashed and controlled. And of course, she's so special, so it doesn't affect her, nor her love interest, the worst guy in the world. One thing I don't understand, well, a couple things I don't really understand, because it doesn't really make any sense, about this, like, controlling injection, is it seems like everyone is just sort of mindless. They're not thinking about anything. They're just doing like they're told to do. But that's not how the simulations work. The simulations manipulate kind of what you see as reality. And so it doesn't really make sense that they wouldn't see what is happening as like that episode of Black Mirror where they're using like this manipulative of reality to make the army think that they're shooting at monsters, basically. With Tobias, when they inject him with the new serum that they made for the Divergence, Janine explains that he is being like manipulated to see things differently. Like he can't tell the difference between like who is a friend and who is an enemy, and it allows him to still have his own will. And that makes more sense. It doesn't really make sense that the same serums that they're using for like the simulations are now something that is used to just straight up control people and make them like brainless robots, basically. I'm also really confused about why they don't work for Divergence. I feel like it's just supposed to be like a, look, you're so special, you're different, that's why it doesn't work. But like, why? Like, why would that be a thing? Because I get the whole point of like the different factions. It's not necessarily what you value, it's what drives you and what is like your motivator. That's what Tobias was saying previously. It feels weird to call him Tobias. I feel like we're not that close. But he was saying that it's not about what you do, it's about what you think. So why in the world would it matter if like, is it the fact that Divergents have like multiple things that drive you? Because that's the thing. everybody has that. I suppose I think it's silly as a concept, the idea that like, oh, Divergents are special and rare because they fit into multiple factions, because they have multiple things that drive them. That is true about everyone, and we see that even with other characters that we meet who aren't Divergent. People have different motivations in different scenarios. That's all I can say. I feel like the author of this book forgot that she already revealed that Triss's mom was Dauntless. When Triss's mom came to visit her at the Dauntless compound, she had the realization that her mom was Dauntless because she knew her way around the area, and she was like, oh my gosh, my mom used to be in Dauntless, that's crazy. And so we already knew this, and then when her mom rescues her at the end, she sees a tattoo on like the underside of her arm, and she's like, oh my gosh, Mom, you're Dauntless. We act like this is a surprise to us. We know. All right, so I just finished Divergent. Final thoughts. I think I'm too old for this book. You know, I can see how like a 13-year-old girl who is, you know, still figuring out who she is and often feels unportrayed in the media by these like two-dimensional characters that women often get portrayed as in movies and films and books, could potentially see this book as something that would be empowering and could potentially like the idea of their difference being a good thing. On the other hand, I really, really hate the romance between Triss and Tobias. I don't like it. It's creepy. Everything that he says is just like so red flag to me. A lot of this book does not really make a lot of sense. I think a lot of it is very much like, how do we make her unique and special? Oh, she's the only one not affected by this thing. She's the only one who can tell she's in a simulation. She's the only one who has multiple motivations. And it's like, okay, but why? What's the point of anything? I do think that Veronica Roth did put some effort in, if only by the fact of like the extras that she included at the end of the book. The fact that she included like a playlist for the book, the fact that she included a bunch of classical quotes which inspired Triss and some of the other characters, that was impressive to me. Like seeing quotes from like Antigone and Agamemnon, I was like, what is, how is this what you drew inspiration from for this? Antigone is wonderful and you drew inspiration for that and got this? How? But also the inclusion of like the manifestos of each of the different factions, which all are so different, but I think really show the personality of each faction. And I just think that's really interesting that she put the thought into creating the world building for that. And there's also a quiz at the end of the book to show which faction you're in. All right, it's been a couple of days since I finished Divergent. That is how much time it took me to process that. I am finally ready to get started on Insurgent, second book. First things first, I will say it is nice to actually be seeing another faction. I can't believe I'm saying that, but at least we're expanding the world a bit. I also find it deeply funny that we find out that the reason that the Amities are all so nice is because they're all just like hyped up on serum. Like every time we've seen them previously to this, they've been singing and laughing, and now it makes sense because now we know that they are all absolutely yorked out of their gourds. I find it really funny that Triss's response to trauma is to give herself a bob. It's just, I mean, who hasn't at, you know, times of panic? Where the previous book was just going through Triss's training, this one seems like a cycle of going to a different faction, hiding for a while until the Erudite attack, and having to leave again. And this includes even meeting the factionless, who are led by Forrest's mother, who was supposed to be dead. I find it deeply irritating when media does this, where like a character is known to be dead, or we watch them die, and then you find out like, oh, actually they've been alive this whole time. Also, it's surprising to me that people wouldn't know that she had an affair, because Abnegation does feel like the kind of faction that would have like the shame bell of Game of Thrones, where like she had an affair. That's selfish. Why am I trying to make sense of this book? This book doesn't make any sense. Some things are happening. I don't have to wait quite as long as I did in the previous book for something to happen, because I needed to wait until the end of the previous book for something interesting to happen. Can I just say, I really, really don't like 4. I don't like him. I've said it before, I'll say it again. The way he treats Triss is just not good at all. And the fact that he's so mean to her. She just killed someone for the first time. One of her friends. She watched her parents die. And so yeah, she can't shoot straight. Okay. Get a grip, 4. Seriously. I think it's crazy that the Dauntless just make senior citizens either become homeless or kill themselves. Crazy choices. And to be honest, it does make sense, because thinking back on it now, I realized that when we were following Triss at the Dauntless compound, we never saw any, like, seniors, which I think I just chalked up to the fact, like, she's in training. She's, you know, around, like, the young people who are in charge of training. I really hate 4. Triss then has to admit to killing one of her friends during the attack. And his first thought is to get upset with her for not sharing. Can I just say, genuinely, I think I am too old for this book. What even is your relationship? Neither of you trust each other. Oftentimes you don't seem to like each other. He is incredibly toxic. I don't like him, and I want him to get away from her. But also, I think they both just need to work on themselves a bit before they start, like, pursuing a relationship with somebody. Wait. Something has just been put deeply into perspective for me, and that is that Triss and 4 have only known each other for a month. Caleb is talking about how he won't have a faction anymore after Erudite is gone, and Triss says you could go sit with them, nodding towards the Erudite refugees. I don't know them, he shrugs. I was only there for a month, remember? They both left home at the same time. So she's known this guy for a month. This is the way he talks to her, and they're in love with each other. Shut up. Oh my gosh. I knew it was a stupid relationship, but I didn't realize it was that stupid. Janine is finally willing to mix things up and stop just sending people to invade different factions, and decides instead to emulate the Sycorax from David Tennant's first full episode of Doctor Who, The Christmas Invasion, by having a few different Dauntless being mind-controlled onto the roof, threatening to step off the roof unless Divergents start turning themselves into the Erudite. Okay, so I do just want to talk about the section that I just read, because I think there was one part that was the first moment of actual substance that this book has given me. I think it's Lynn is her name. She's one of the Erudite transfers is talking to Triss about how Christina is angry with Triss about killing Will, lying about killing Will, and revealing it in front of everyone during the interrogation. And she uses her sort of erudite mentality to explain to her, like, why it was logical for Triss to do this, and why it doesn't make sense for her to be angry with her, because she's been in Dauntless. She's been trained to use violence to solve her problems. She was put into a moment of panic, and, you know, he was going to kill her. It was self-defense, and it just makes sense that this happened. And I think that this is an interesting moment, and the first real moment of substance that this book has given me, because up until this point, we've seen the good and the bad of every faction. We've seen the good and the bad of, like, the Candor and the Abnegation and the Amity. We've not seen the good and the bad of Erudite until this moment. We've only seen really the bad side of Erudite. Erudite is the villain. They're constantly coming after them. Janine is the big bad of the entire book. And in this moment, I think we see, like, the benefit of Erudite thinking for the first time, and that it can be useful, it can be helpful to use to process grief and to, you know, foster forgiveness between the two of them. And even though Christina is not willing to hear it at the moment, it allows her to think about it going forward. See if this sounds familiar. The young 16-year-old rebel who has to take down the oppressive government discovers that the rebels that she is working with are actually not that good of a people and are willing to kill innocents to get what they need done. I think I've seen this film before. And I did actually like the ending that time, but I don't think I didn't like this one. All right, so I just finished up Insurgent and I have a lot of thoughts. I'm gonna sit down and tell you them in a bit, but I literally have about 5 minutes before I have to go to work. So I'm gonna just give you my first thoughts here now. This book's ending, I think, is a massive failure. And the reason is because they've spent so much time building up what this big reveal, what this information that's gonna change everything could be. And it's like so big that Janine is willing to kill an entire faction to make sure that the rest of the society doesn't hear it. It's so big that Caleb is willing to switch sides. If you want something to be scary or shocking or like concerning, don't reveal it to your audience, because whatever people will imagine in their head is going to be the most effective for them. They spend so much time building up this, horrific, what is outside the walls, what could it be, like it's so big and people are willing to die for it. And then the reveal at the end is just that war, violence, people turning on each other, and it's kind of silly for two reasons. Number one, that's already happening inside the community, so people hearing like, oh, you were put here to try and make a better society and you failed. What? And I understand like maybe there's like an idea there of like, okay, they were meant to put in this society, create a better society, and they failed and they ended up doing exactly the same thing as the previous society, and that's a commentary on human nature. Kind of depressing for a YA novel, I gotta be honest, but maybe that's what the intention was. The other thing with it though that I think doesn't work is that we kind of already know that. Like, when we're describing the factions at the beginning of the series and kind of what they stand for, the whole idea is that society fell, society was flawed, and each faction had a reason that they believed why society was flawed. So we already knew that society fell, and we probably already imagined that there was, like, violence and war, because that's what happens when societies fall. It's not giving us any new information, and this has happened before. It happened when we found out that Triss's mom was dauntless, and then later on in the same book, Triss is like surprised that her mom's dauntless. I do have more I want to say about sort of the novel as a whole, but that's gonna have to wait. I have to go to work, and I will talk to you guys later. Okay, I've had some time to think about it. Here are my thoughts on Insurgent and the Divergent trilogy as a whole. I imagine The Hunger Games is like a piece of delicious cake on a plate. And Divergent is like someone took that cake, ate the whole thing, and delivered you an empty plate with just some crumbs on it. So in this case, the plate is sort of the fundamentals of what makes a dystopian novel. An oppressive government, a 16-year-old girl who's able to take down the government, society divided into different divisions, the fundamentals, right? But all the things that are good about The Hunger Games, the actual cake, is gone. And we're left with just a few crumbs. And what I mean by that is basically that this book series has occasionally the seeds of a good idea that don't get built upon. So I'll give you an example. Triss and Caleb's mother and father are from Dauntless and Erudite, respectively, and transferred into Abnegation. And on the reverse side of that, Triss and Caleb then transfer out of Abnegation into what we later discover are their parents' factions. And that could be really interesting. That could give us an interesting conversation about nature versus nurture, and if you're raised in a certain faction, are you going to be like that faction, or are you more likely to follow in the footsteps of wherever your parents were? It could bring up a really interesting conversation about parental-child relationships. In an attempt to become not like their parents, who they resent for these things, they transfer out of Abnegation, only to discover that they have become just like their parents by doing so. That could have been really interesting, but we don't touch on that. In fact, it's never even really brought up, this parallel. There are a lot of things in this book series that also just don't make sense. There are things that happen seemingly for like the progression of a story, even though it doesn't make any sense. There is a fairly significant moment where Triss chases after Janine because they're using an earpiece, and she knows that, like, oh, if she's using the earpiece, she must be nearby. You're telling me that the Erudite can invent solar-powered cars, guns that shoot transmitters, and simulations which can manipulate how people think and make decisions, but they can't invent the functionality of a phone? Really? Cell phones existed when this book came out. Triss is able to go through so many like checkpoints and past guards because people just don't recognize her. They have cameras. Why do they not have like some sort of facial recognition software? Like, I'm pretty sure that existed at the point that this book came out as well, or if it didn't, it was definitely like something people had thought of before. If you're trying to make the villains sort of these characters who are like ultra intelligent and they're like so good at inventing stuff and they've created everything, but you're not giving them the tools that they would invent that would actually help them in these scenarios because it makes it easier for your heroes, then you're not making choices that make sense. You're making choices because you think that that's the best way to progress the story. I'm getting very worked up about this. I shouldn't be getting worked up about this. It doesn't matter. I'm finally done Insurgent. I'm gonna get started on the third book after a little bit of time because I need some time to process this. Book 3 picks up exactly where we left off, giving us more of the same. But the style is actually a little bit different because now we have two perspectives switching between Triss and Four. Unfortunately, this is not very effective because the two of them don't have distinct enough voices to be able to tell easily who is who, and I often found myself forgetting which character was speaking.
One of the issues with this book is that it is copying the ideas of other series, while simultaneously being really, really heavy-handed about stuff. People say out loud, "You're just as bad as the last people that were here." The scene where they destroy the bowls for the choosing ceremonies, destroying the fundamentals of the society, but they're also destroying the thing that allows people to choose. That could be really interesting, or it would be if they didn't spell that out to us. The fact that they're saying like, oh, they're destroying this symbol of me choosing a new life, like, it doesn't make it interesting. It just makes us feel like you think the audience is an idiot.
I find the motivations of the people in this book very confusing, especially the Allegiant, who want to send people outside of the society, but also at the same time want to stay there and stay in the factions.
Great. We are outside of the city, and there are more people and more names to keep track of. I like to think that I'm a smart person and that I'm good at keeping track of this kind of stuff, but the fact that there's just so many people, so many of whom offer so little to the story, is so irritating. And now they're introducing more people. How am I supposed to keep track of everybody?
Speaking of stolen storylines, the Bureau of Genetic Welfare's purpose reminds me a lot of Fallout, where each of the vaults is a contained society where they're performing some sort of experiment. But like, if all the experiments were the same.
Gotta love that old YA trope of the girls being irritated about other girls talking to their man for no reason. I'm very confused about the fact that everyone seems to know Triss's family. Zoe's telling her about it. David gives her the file about her mom's backstory. What kind of celebrity in this bureau is she that everyone knows who she is?
Yay, it's time for another rebellion, this time with the genetically damaged.
It just feels like this book, I'm going on a loop. Because first we've got the Divergents, who are rebelling against the Erudite. The factionless are there, and then we've got the Allegiant, who are rebelling against them. And then the Allegiant go, and they come across the Bureau. Yes, things are gonna be great, but turns out they're not good either, and so there's another rebellion going on. It feels like an attempt to show the complexity of, like, there's not, like, a clear good and bad, but because it's just the same conflict every time, it's getting tiring. It would be interesting if it was Triss
Or Tobias. Maybe they're not so clear-cut and good. The fact that we have clear heroes undercuts that. Ooh, this is big. Janine didn't get the simulation serum herself. She got it from the Bureau. However, this whole thing is just very sketchy. I don't know who to trust. I don't know who's lying. It reminds me a little bit of that scene in Matched where they reveal that the government knew that the rebels were going to try and take over, so they just sort of like let it happen. Can't trust anybody these days. This book is basically teaching me two things about this series. Number one, you can't trust anyone. Number two, nothing is original. The whole situation with Nita and the attack on the Bureau. Do I trust Triss, who doesn't trust him, but could just be tainted by the fact that she's jealous? Or do I trust Tobias, who trusts her, in that there's nothing going on? She ends up being correct, and Nita tries to kill everybody. So it's a problem. Now, the second thing of not anything being original is that I'm getting a lot of reminders of Mockingjay with Prim being killed by the bombing. I already mentioned the comparison to Matched. I'm getting massive Fallout Vault Tech vibes from the Bureau. Sometimes I read books and I'm like, yeah, this kind of reminds me of that, and like the similar vibes. But I've never read a book where I've so clearly been like, yeah, this reminds me of this specific scene from this book. I hate these two so much. I do think 4 has a point. Triss does want him to agree with her all the time. This has been a conflict previously, but at the same time, do not take this as me defending him. I still don't like 4 at all. And the fact that he like is yelling at her to the point where like she's crying now, I hate this guy. I hate this guy so much. These two are so toxic for each other. I know that as readers, we're supposed to kind of suspend our disbelief of, yeah, this 16-year-old is able to lead, you know, rebellions and government planning. Why on earth do the people in this book trust that? The fact that David is allowing a 16-year-old girl to not only sit in on meetings where they're talking about these like big plans to reset the experiments, but also a meeting where they're talking about erasing the memories of the people who live in her home, and the fact that there's like a big war going on. Like, that to me seems like something that you wouldn't want to tell anybody. Why would you tell a minor this? She shouldn't be involved in these kinds of meetings. It really does become clear that these are a bunch of teenagers when they're making a plan on how to erase the Bureau's memories and stop them from wiping out Chicago. And it just boils down to all of them arguing and yelling at each other. Well, I wasn't recording, but it finally happened. We finally got to the obligatory YA romance, fade to black romance scene. Another sign that I've gotten too old is it makes me deeply uncomfortable to be reading about a 18-year-old and a 16-year-old making out. Is this a safe place? Can I admit that I don't actually understand their plan to save Chicago? Like, of course I understand them inoculating their friends and family to keep them from having their memory erased and trying to erase the memory of the entire Bureau to stop them from erasing Chicago, but that doesn't solve the fact that there's still a civil war going on in that city, and I doubt they're going to be able to talk their way out of that one.
I have made it clear that I do not like 4, and I don't really like his relationship with Triss, but now that they have had their fade to black romance scene, I have a new reason to not like them, and it is that they are both just incredibly horny. There's only been like 2 chapters since that scene, and in both of those scenes they have like been kissing each other and been like, wow, it's so great to kiss them and not care what anyone thinks. Ugh. Can you please go back to caring a little bit about what people think? Because I don't like you, and I feel like that counts for something. I feel like we need to dive into why Triss is so eager to sacrifice herself. Like, I understand it's an abnegation thing that, you know, like you put other people first, But the fact that she's like, yeah, maybe I'll be okay. I can survive the death gas thing. And it's just like, girl, I've never seen anyone with less self-preservation skills than this person right here. And that is saying something. Honestly, this book is just sort of depressing because for confronting his mother and being like, you're just like my abusive father because you're just now being a tyrant in the city. And maybe that's the lesson. Everybody's complicated. There's good and bad in everyone. Feels like the lesson is everyone will betray you at some point. So Triss is dead. We're now only seeing things from Tobias's perspective. I will say I admire the guts to kill off your main character. However, I don't think it's very effective. Triss hasn't really had any sort of like character development that was resolved by her death. If it was a character like Peter who had sacrificed himself, I think that would feel more fulfilling because he's cruel. And as, you know, his conversation with Four, he wants to forget those things. To have him redeem himself because he clearly doesn't want to be like that. But for Triss has been sacrificing herself from the beginning. It's been something that she's been having arguments with Four about. And honestly, it would probably even be better if even Four had sacrificed himself, because then it would be sort of the situation where Triss has to learn to let other people be the hero. Also, can I just say, this erasing people's memory is kind of putting plot holes in the whole logic of this entire book. Because they're saying that when they reset people, basically they're a brand new person and their personality completely changes. As I just said, David's not the person who Four remembers. If that's the case, then the way people act has nothing to do with their genetics. Which also this world has established as being an actual thing, because Triss has like an overdeveloped prefrontal cortex or whatever dumb science they want to talk about. Then what is the point of the genetics? And maybe they're trying to show like, oh yeah, they're wrong. The genetics doesn't define who you are. But you're telling me that this like government bureau or whatever they are didn't figure that out? Let's be logical here, okay? I'm sure that they're trying to make me feel bad for Four by including all of these chapters of him, like, grieving after Triss died. It won't work. I still don't like him. I have no feeling about her death. If that sounds harsh to you, just remember these are fictional characters. And I'm not rescinding any of my criticism. I still don't like him. Alright, well, after a long time reading, I can finally say that I have completed Allegiant, and I have completed the entire Divergent trilogy.
This is the part of the video where I give my final thoughts and say something nice about the experience of reading these books for the first time. But I'm struggling to find anything nice to say. This trilogy fails on every level. What could be an attempt to create a character that young girls disillusioned with how the media represents them can relate to is instead a shallow character who experiences no character growth and encourages a toxic relationship standard. Any semblance of sense is abandoned in favor of trying to tell a more action-packed story, and any crumb of an interesting story is abandoned in favor of unoriginal storylines, characters, and scenes. This series embodies everything people complain about in the current publishing industry. Toxic relationships marketed as romance. Marketing targeted at vulnerable teens. Novels being published and promoted that bring nothing new. Divergent is how you kill a genre. Break it down to its bare bones and strip any substance. We all deserve substance in our reading, whether the genre is adult fantasy, speculative fiction, or even a YA dystopian novel.